Greetings, everyone. My name's Marcus Stekener. I'm the chair of the Load Research Chapter. Today we have Ross Solomons with us to present on the NLI, Neighbourhood Lifestyle Index data set and insights from that. In talking to Ross and Elsie from GEOTERRAIMAGE, I asked them to try and sort of illustrate the principles behind this data set to us and unpack fully what's in the data set. And so we're very fortunate to have Ross with us today, and I'll just give him an introduction. Ross is a qualified geospatial specialist at GTI, and he's got more than 10 years experience with a proven track record in developing and applying advanced GIS analytic techniques. He's currently focusing on GTI's solar analytics dataset, identifying trends within the data, analyzing and visualizing spatial data, and introducing these to a wide array of clientele while providing valuable insights into solar installations across South Africa and broader energy market. Ross has a strategic perspective in bridging the gap between client requirements and needs and the products or solutions that address these to ensure informed decision making. So Ross will share, I think, key findings and give us a detailed look at how this fits into demand forecasting in the solar energy sector. And please, folks, just bear in mind that this is a wall-to-wall data set for South Africa. So the number of use cases for this is fairly large. Ross, without further ado, I give the floor to you. You have 40 minutes.
So, all right. So my name is Ross. I'm here with Elsie Zwenis as well. So we work at GTI, and so I'm going to go through this presentation with you about the NLI. Yeah, so this presentation is basically about the Neighbourhood Lifestyle Index with a bit of a touch on our solar panel insights as well. So the important thing here is that our Neighbourhood Lifestyle Index is essentially a income-based segmentation based primarily on household income. And we sort of want to show you how this data set has got value in the energy sector as well, and highlight one or two applications of the data in the renewable energy space and how it can be used to promote data-driven decision-making as well in this particular space. All right, so I just want to start with a very short introduction of GTI as a company, GEOTERRAIMAGE. So we are essentially data people, spatial data people. We've got about 25 years experience in this area. We support a large variety of different clients, both in the public and the private sectors, and many in very specialized markets such as the energy market, telecommunications, and so on as well. So we basically offer a series of innovative products and solutions for all these clients. So we like to talk more about information than data, because obviously information is the byproduct of good data. And the key here is that we create many different primary data sets from a variety of inputs. We do rely quite heavily on remote sensing and satellite imagery and so on. And we employ machine learning, various data models, all kinds of things to take these primary data sets and build what we call information products. Right, and we do incorporate big data sources as well when we process this data into the final product. So the key here is that data can become quite complex, but we like to produce information that is usable by the end user in formats that suit the client. And the reason for that is that we want to reach decision makers, and not all decision makers are deeply technical in the geospatial sense and so on. So we try to create data sets that are usable by just about anybody. All right, and then as mentioned, we work in a number of different sectors, the built environment, environmental sector, agriculture, and then telecoms, retail, even banking, the energy sector as well. The key is that we try and serve a wide variety of clients with our pool of data sets. This is just a visual representation of what we do. So we create our own primary data sets, and we employ various techniques, geospatial techniques, computer science techniques to create these information products that can then be consumed by an end user system. And very importantly, we have a very modular approach to data creation. So what do I mean by that? Our data sets are mostly captured at the same geographic boundaries. And the most common boundary that we work with is an enumeration area. For those of you who might not be familiar with that, it is the area boundaries that are defined by Stats SA that they use for their census planning and so on. So it's the smallest little areas that the country is split up into. They consist of about 100 to 250 households, give or take. And that is what we model our data to. And again, a large variety of different data sets. Our income segmentation, we've got township data, building data, population data, demographic data, growth potential information, all kinds of data sets. And all of them are sort of delivered at the same geographic level. And the value of that is that the data sets are very easy to combine with one another. And what you find is we have a large variety of clients that using the same pool of data, but combining them in different ways to answer completely different questions. All right. And what you'll find in the real world is that almost everything that we deal with in our working lives and personal lives have a spatial component. So the spatial component is deeply important. So for example, we might combine population data, building type data, growth potential data, new development data in a particular area for demand forecasting. And that could be, demand modeling. And that can be for anything. It can be for anything from motor vehicles to solar panels to chocolate bars. It doesn't really matter. We can build these demand forecasts based on this, this pool of information. So the principle that we work with at GEOTERRAIMAGE in the built environment is that we take a neighborhood such as this, and it's very important to take note here that we do this at a national level. I'm just breaking it down to one neighborhood and simplifying it. But we basically map out all the buildings across the country. So we identify all the buildings, where they're located using a variety of techniques. We then go and pack on information on top of these buildings. So we go and we basically work out what the characteristics of these buildings are in terms of what is the building used for. So what is the land use? Is it a residential building? Is it commercial? Is it industrial, medical, whatever it might be? And then we model demographics on top of this. How many people live or work in that building? What are the demographic profiles of these people? What are their lifestyle characteristics? How do people migrate in and out of their neighborhoods during the day? And what other characteristics do these neighborhoods have? And how dynamic are these neighborhoods? So this is something we do at a national level. So there's two approaches to generating information about the population. So this slide speaks about the survey approach against our approach to mapping out buildings and modeling information from the ground up. Important thing that I want to just put across here is we aren't saying that one is better than the other, but a lot of our data is very supplementary to survey data that is produced through a survey. And this is what makes them different. So with a survey, typically you would look at maybe 20 to 35,000 people that you interview. So you might ask them a series of questions about their income, what car they drive, whatever it is that your survey is based on. And then you try and make that facially representative. All right. Could be linked to a house or whatever. And then you scale that up to the rest of the population. All right. So you're almost interpolating this information to the rest of the population. And these surveys are often very subjective. So you sit down with somebody and you ask them a few questions, and oftentimes people are quite nervous about answering certain questions about how many people might live in their home or income or any other information that they might find quite private. So the results can often be subjective. And then surveys target specific groups. For example, they might be targeting the top 30% of earners in a particular region or across the country and so on. And often rural areas are excluded depending on the nature of the survey. And then there's some challenges in actually plotting that spatially as well. Whereas the approach that we use, we basically map out every building in the country, or every building that we can map. It's just about all of them. And we build our data on top of these buildings, on top of this foundation. So it covers the country nationally. It isn't based on a survey and then scaled up. We're literally modeling it to the physical data. So it's based on more than just a small sample. And because of this, it's representative of the entire national population. All right. And we've got quite a big inventory of buildings. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But we have mapped out most of the buildings in the country. And also, again, because we're not targeting only specific areas, the vast majority of the data that I talk about today covers urban areas, rural areas, traditional areas. It doesn't matter. It's wall to wall, as Marcus mentioned in the beginning. And then obviously the modular approach to this is that we can apply whatever information we want on top of this, whether it's credit bureau data, solar panel data, it doesn't matter. We can overlay it on top of each other to build deeper insights into certain things that we might be looking at. All right, so I'm going to mention a few of the other data sets that we work with. And the reason for that is that all these data sets speak to the Neighbourhood Lifestyle Index data set. The Neighbourhood Lifestyle Index is built based on these data sets. These data sets are crucial to the development of the NLI. And as mentioned, we do map out all the buildings using a variety of techniques, and we're around 32 million points at this point in time. So that's 1 point per structure that we've mapped out. And that could be anything from a residential building to a commercial building to a block of flats, someone's garage in their backyard, a shed on a farm. Just about every building that you can see on a satellite image, we have mapped. And we continue to do so, and we're always building on this data set. All right. And from that data set, as I mentioned, we start to build demographics on top of this. And just the key thing, again, this builds into our NLI, and I'll discuss that just now. But the key thing about our data that I want to mention is that our demographics and population data is not reliant on the census. We model it internally. So it's modeled to these structures. We have an in-house statistician, Ariane Neertling, who works with us. She has been affiliated with Stats SA as well. And she has a very heavy hand in developing these demographic data sets, modeled internally and not reliant on the census. And I'll discuss the significance of that as we go through these slides as well. Another interesting thing that we add to our data in terms of population is that, with a typical census, they would knock on your door and ask you how many people live in your house and so on. So it's actually nighttime population that's being gathered. Our data also speaks to daytime population. So how many people are in your neighborhood during the day while everybody's at work? Yeah, so interesting information like that. All right, so why is demographics and population so important to the energy sector? Well, for obvious reasons, population growth drives the demand for energy. And, that is obviously significant to many different organizations and people. And then also trends in urbanization as well. So again, rapid urbanization impacts electricity, greater demand for electricity. A lot of planning needs to then take place of how to extend the grid, design the grid, and so on. And then energy pricing and affordability as well, it impacts that too. So income levels in terms of the NLI, the Neighbourhood Lifestyle Index, and I'll get to now, extremely important. Okay, because we have to consider areas where perhaps they might battle to afford energy and that kind of thing. Certain areas, people can afford energy more than others. And obviously, there's all important things that need to go into planning as well. Again, all these things really tie into grid planning. So knowing where people are aids in designing grids that can handle peak demand effectively. And then obviously very important in terms of disaster preparedness. Areas with highly dense population densities during a time of crisis, or the grid goes down or something goes wrong. These are areas that maybe we need to focus on. So in terms of disaster planning as well, extremely, extremely important. And then why our data is supplementary info to the census. And again, we're not saying don't use the census. Census is extremely useful information, but our data can fill gaps in terms of the census. So the first thing that I think about is the temporal nature of the census. So it takes, obviously the census isn't done year after year. It's only released every so many years, and the real world changes all the time. So change occurs quite quickly, and statistics can fall behind quite rapidly. Our data we are updating annually, so we release a new release every single year on our demographics data sets. Actually, on the all our data sets are released annually. So there's the temporal aspect first of all, and then also the level at which census data is aggregated. It's typically at municipal level, but a lot of our clients and a lot of people from all sectors are looking for information at a more granular level, at EA level, or even stand level. And so our data, a lot of our data is at stand level, but typically EA level. And the nice thing about that as well is that you get more granularity, but it can also be, again, rolled up to different administrative boundaries like subplace, main place, province, and so on as well, municipalities, and so on. And then the other thing is, with the rapid expansion of urban areas and informal settlements, absolutely certain fringe areas and informal settlements can easily be missed by a census. If you imagine what an undertaking it is to plan something at that scale, certainly there are areas that might be overlooked, and that's where our data can perhaps fill these gaps. So it's the time component that we update extremely regularly, so you get up-to-date demographic view of the country at a national level, as well as because our data is sort of coast to coast or across the entire country, we cover everything from urban to informal settlements, absolutely everything within our boundary. All right, so that brings us to the Neighbourhood Lifestyle Index. So all of these data sets speak to the Neighbourhood Lifestyle Index. And I'll first just tell you a little bit about what it is. So put simply, it is an income-based segmentation model. So a lifestyle model in a lot of ways. And it is an index from 1 to 10, lower numbers indicating your less affluent communities and higher numbers indicating your more affluent communities. So very simple, 1 to 10. Some of you might be familiar with the LSM, which is also an index of 1 to 10. Same thing with the NLI. The important thing is that it's not survey-based, so it's not based on a survey that we conduct to find out about what people own and so on. It is modeled from the data sets that I've mentioned previously, as well as a few other inputs as well. So it's essentially just modeled from a variety of different big data inputs. Again, it's a 10-group index, but this is also variable. So you can aggregate them into 5 groups or 3 or even 2 groups if you want to. It's very flexible in that way as well. We can deliver it in whatever way people are interested in. And I want to talk briefly about the LSM. So again, I don't want to make this a NLI versus LSM presentation. They're actually totally different models designed for different things. They've got different applications, but a lot of people do use the LSM as an indirect income segmentation. So I'm only speaking on the LSM from that angle. All right. So if I speak about shortfalls, I'm only speaking about the shortfalls in that context. So again, most of you are probably familiar with the LSM, so the Living Standard Measure. So this is based on a survey where a portion of the population is surveyed and questions are asked, such as where do they live? And then it is very heavily reliant on what people own. So it's reliant on goods. So how many cell phones are in the house? How many radios are in the house? Is there access to running water, hot water? Does the household have a vacuum cleaner, for example? Questions like that. And then from that, you get put into a category of lifestyle measurement, essentially. All right. So again, it's survey-based, and then they scale that up to the national population, but it is also an index of 1 to 10. Lower numbers indicating people with lower financial means, higher numbers indicating people with greater financial means. So some of the shortcomings, again, only in terms of using it as an income metric, is that it is slightly outdated. The last survey for this purpose was done all the way back in 2015. Because it is just based on a subset survey, it may not be accurately reflective in all areas. And then one thing that we hear a lot about is that a lot of people feel that ownership of items does not necessarily speak directly to income. It does, but it also doesn't. So if you think that these surveys were done quite a few years ago, a lot has changed over that time. In the past, items such as cell phones, microwaves, and other things that are maybe part of this list were seen as luxury items that perhaps not everybody owned. But today, just about everybody, for example, owns a cell phone. It might be a different type of cell phone. Some people own expensive iPhones, and other people might have, cheaper models that can just make phone calls. But a cell phone is a cell phone, according to the survey. And everybody these days has a cell phone. So you kind of lose a bit of granularity for that reason. Another thing that people speak about is the fact that the LSM, a lot of people live outside of their means in South Africa. So people own a lot. They've got big cars and phones and all these items on the list, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've got disposable income. All right. So it might not accurately reflect their living standard necessarily. So it can often be incorrectly used as a proxy for income level. Okay, so the NLI, and where does this come from? Why did we start developing our own income-based segmentation? So it literally came from demand. So some of our clients back in 2015, 2016 were looking for income-based segmentation models. And quite a lot of this interest came from market research companies and survey companies who wanted to design survey samples that definitely targeted the income bracket that they were looking for. So they wanted to make sure that they're getting the right amount of respondents for their surveys in a certain income bracket, and the LSM for these specific clients wasn't quite filling that gap. So they wanted a direct income-based segmentation. And that's what GTI set out to basically build. So again, just to reiterate, it is not survey-based. The root source of this information is really satellite imagery, and then the demographic data that we build on top of this. We do look at some credit bureau information and at some level official statistics, especially in the past. But the real things that we take into account here are household income, household size, types of dwelling, and geographic location. These are sort of ballpark the criteria that we look at when building this segmentation model. So things like dwelling type and geography speak to each other, and it's quite an important example to make. But when it comes to a dwelling type, you might have a flat in the middle of Sandton City, and then you've got a flat in the middle of a rural area somewhere in the Western Cape. These are drastically different dwellings. So it's very difficult to assign an income just to the fact that the people that live in a flat. The geographic location is extremely important in this case. Totally different people, different income levels, different demographic profiles, and so on. And just something that I wanted to mention there. And just some of the unique features of the NLI is that it is the only direct income-based segmentation at EA level. It does give us a national perspective at EA level again. So it's again wall-to-wall across the whole country. And a very important element again is that we do update it regularly. Every single year we update the NLI, and that's based on this new developments module that we run as well on a frequent basis, which I will mention in just a moment. All right, so we're constantly updating this data set. And importantly, again, although it's based on EA level, we roll it up to other hierarchical boundaries as well, subplace, main place, municipalities, and even user-defined boundaries as well. So if a client specifically wants us to build information for specific boundaries, we can do that too. All right, so just some of the key benefits of this. So talk about this in terms of marketing and also the energy sector as well. But it is a great market a tool in terms of marketing because it allows you to sort of identify your key market, all right, and identify your potential customer base. And in that way helps you to identify risk and opportunities in your trading area, areas where your product would more likely do well, areas where it likely wouldn't. It really helps you to identify your target market. And I'm going to use an example of this in a moment to, in terms of the energy sector as well. All right. And because of this, because the tool allows us to find our market more accurately in terms of income segmentation, obviously your return on investment goes up. And we can compare and analyze neighborhoods and competitors and so on. And this actually goes for all the data sets and not just the NLI on its own, but in a position where you might have competitors that are really successful or an existing branch that is really successful, you can use the NLI to identify other areas that meet similar criteria in terms of income level and demographics and so on. So it is a clever tool to use to compare and analyze markets against existing markets as well. All right, so just looking at these classes. So as mentioned, it is a 10 class system, okay, or index, 1 to 10. Your lower segmentation, your values of 1 to 3, for example, would be your lower income communities. And all these statistics that you see on the screen here, these are not necessarily in the physical NLI data set. This is basically sourced from all our other data sets as well that come with it. Remember, because the data sets are modular and we can overlay them, we're able to summarize this data at this NLI level. So I can identify these NLI EAs and then summarize information from the other data sets as such. And then we can draw on this. These are just examples of statistics, by the way, but things such as 70% of people in South Africa are classified in NLI 1, 2, 3. This is drawn directly out of our spatial data set. 28.5% live in formal housing, 27.6% in informal housing. But our building-based land use is also, I think we've got like 90-something classes. So you also get rural dwellings and villages and estates, and it's the segmentation. There's quite a lot of different classes that we use when we classify our building-based land use. 56.4% of all new formal housing developments fall inside this class, for example, and 58.4, and on average, these communities are about 58.4 kilometers from the nearest major shopping centers. Right? That could be reflective of the fact that a lot of these lower income areas might be in rural areas, for example, and so on. Just examples of stats that can be drawn. If we look at our middle income, for example, 20% of the population fall within NLI 4 to 6. 57.6% live in formal standalone housing, 11.9% in flats, and 8.7% in townhouses. And 40% of all new developments take place in this particular segmentation. And then 48.3% of this group are credit active. It's obviously information that we can gather from anonymized credit bureau information. Okay, and then NLI 7 to 10, your higher income. So again, this is all reflected in our data, but we see 9.7% of the population falling in the higher income NLI class. 50.4% live in formal standalone housing, 10% in estates and villages, and 25.4% in townhouses. And 51% of new developments are taking place in NLI class 7 to 10 neighborhoods. And then 16.6% will migrate daily outside of their general area or their community in looking for work. All right. So again, these are examples of statistics, and this has also been updated, since these particular statistics were together. And then just a visual representation, just comparing the NLI to the LSM, how it's just an example. LSM spatial representation in a particular region might look something like this, whereas the NLI as an income representation might show a little bit more granularity, just looking at them visually. And again, just a visual representation of the NLI. So this is Randburg, and your lighter areas represent your lower income areas, your higher income areas, your green colors, and then into your tans and orange and brown colors, represent your poorer communities. And I know it's very difficult to see, but you can just see a typical dwelling that falls within each of these NLI levels. If you look at NLI 1 there, you see buildings that, in that example, look quite informal. If you look at NLI 4, we start to see more formal looking earths and buildings. And then NLI 7, more complex structures, bigger houses, and so on. And just to be clear on this, this is a very crude example, not necessarily always the case. You know, you can have people in NLI 1, for example, living in drastically different looking dwellings to what you see on the screen. This is just a general trend in, you know, what the dwellings might look like in these particular segmentations. And yeah, the nice thing about the data is that we deliver it at a national level or any level you want, but you can literally lay this over an image, whether it's Google Maps, it doesn't really matter. And you can physically go and look at that segmentation. You can go and look at an NLI 1 area and view the neighborhoods that fall underneath them. Okay. Then, yeah, this is just the same representation in Cape Town. You can see the segmentation here, where your more affluent areas versus your less affluent areas. And we see that pattern in reality. So just a quick slide to show you what this data actually looks like. This is the physical data, so it might be a bit difficult to look at the tables that pop up. But you have a map of South Africa, and then you overlay your population data, your NLI data just like this. Again, same thing. Red and orange areas representing your lower NLI regions, greener areas representing your more affluent areas. And we can zoom into Gauteng, for example, and get a bit more granularity on this. This is all at EA level. You can zoom in closer and you can actually view these areas, you know, switch the layers on and off if you want. And all of these parcels that you're looking at here come with a table of the actual attributes that represent them. So you've got all your geographic information about which local municipalities this particular polygon falls in, province, the main place, and so on. And then information about how many households in a particular, like if you look at this red block here, for example, that would represent one of these records, and it might show you how many households fall inside in that particular EA, first of all. And then this shows you the percentage of households that fall in each NLI. So this represents each NLI level, and you've got a percentage value of how many households fall within each NLI. Obviously, the higher the percentage in a particular NLI, that's, you know, where that particular EA, the NLI, overall EA level that NLI falls within. That EA falls within. And then information about primary, secondary, and tertiary. So in that EA, most of the houses fall within NLI 2, for example. Next is NLI 3 and then NLI 1. So just primary versus secondary versus tertiary. And then an overall value as well, what that NLI actually, or what that EA is in terms of NLI, how we've classified it. And that gives you that overall view of the EA. And we speak about the wellness, obviously, if it's an emerging middle class. These classifications are obviously, you can change those depending on how you want to work with the data. If you want 10 classes or 5 or 2 or 3. And then another thing that this data has that's quite interesting that comes with the data is that we look at diversity as well of some of these demographic metrics too. So this is obviously a ratio. So it's a value of 0 to 10. So if we look at diversity of gender, it's a very high value, closer to 10. That means that there is high diversity, which would make sense when it comes to gender. Typically, you're looking at a 50-50 split. Things such as race, we see a little bit more diversity, and then we get a lower number representing the race demographic for a lot of these EAs. We can see just how homogeneous an EA is. All right. And those metrics speak to age as well, and also diversity in terms of NLI. Are we in a neighborhood that is mostly vast majority NLI 9, or are there some NLI 6, 4, 3? Is it quite varied? So it's very interesting. These kind of metrics are very interesting, obviously, in a country like ours. Sorry, I think I might be running out of time. And then how do we keep up with all of this? So how do we update this? We use this new development index that we've built. So we have, so let me start here. The biggest challenge with modeling the real world is that if you want to model real world, you need to understand that the real world is always changing, and you actually need to model that change as well. And that is the biggest challenge, because statistics outdate extremely quickly, especially today. The real world is dynamic, and new trends and shifts occur all the time. And the bottom line is we need to be able to model this change just as well as we model a snapshot in time. One aerial photograph is just a snapshot in time. We need to do this temporally as well, and that's what we do. So we run a new development module that we do this very regularly, monthly, and we deliver this data quarterly. But essentially, we can do this as often as we can get the satellite imagery, to be honest, and that's what we do. And so we can identify where change occurs in a particular space. Not only that, we can also model the nature of that change, what land use is affected, because remember our data sets are modular, so we can tell if this is happening in a residential space, in a commercial space. We can also tell how long or the duration of this development, because every month we're checking if there's change, and that sits in our data set itself and tells you, okay, last month there was change, the month before that there was change, the month before that there wasn't, that kind of thing. We keep that in the data set as well. This new development data that we develop pours directly into our demographic data and our BBLU, which pours into our BBLU, obviously, because now we're mapping out new buildings, which pours directly into our demographic data, which then pours into our NLI and our other data sets as well. All right, so important to locate new development hotspots across the country for commercial reasons, but also in the energy sector to understand demand on the grid and demand for energy and that kind of thing. All right, very important. So, yeah, anywhere where you need to track change, keep tabs on where change is occurring. And especially for marketers, what we like to say is that there's always new markets emerging from scratch that weren't there before. And if you aren't keeping tabs of that, then there's probably somebody else that is already probing those markets. And then just quickly to talk about this in the energy space. Sorry if I sound rushed. I think I might be running out of time. But in the energy space, so we've also been mapping out solar panels across South Africa as well. So we rely heavily on artificial intelligence for this, and we map out all the solar panels that we can detect across the country. But again, the power in this is that because we have that modular approach, we can overlay land use data on top of these installments. So we know that on this particular property, it does have an installation and it falls in the residential space or it falls in the commercial space. We can also calculate the size of that installation as well to a certain degree, and we can work out a kilowatt peak that is produced by that panel. So we can't speak for the system that lies underneath the roof because we can't detect that, but we can make quite accurate assumptions about the systems based on the solar panels themselves. So why does the NLI speak to this? And we've actually found that it speaks directly to the renewable energy market in that the vast majority of installations that we have found occur in higher income areas. So once we overlaid this data, it was very obvious that almost all the installations are occurring in your high NLI zones, your NLI 7 to 10, actually quite a few in NLI 6 as well, with some bleed into 5. But from NLI 4 and down, in your more, I suppose, financially vulnerable sectors, there's far less installations occurring, if any. All right. As you get to the lower numbers, there's virtually nothing. And we saw this immediately when we mapped this data out. So if you look at Tshwane, for example, we see a lot of concentration of installations in your middle class to upper class regions. But then you look at Mamelodi and there's, a gap where there's very few installations occurring. Same in Joburg, where Alexandra's got very few installations occurring, and the same thing in Cape Town as well. Same pattern, something that we did expect, but to see it visually is very interesting, and for many reasons. So firstly, if you're a company that is looking for demand for solar panels, you're probably going to look in the areas that are most likely to install, which are your higher NLI areas. But also from a humanitarian perspective, where are our vulnerable communities in terms of a power disaster? Very important. And also, where are the communities that sort of put a heavier load on the grid because not many of the properties are running their own solar systems, which perhaps, help the grid a little bit as well. So there's a lot of different reasons why this type of information is quite important. And one thing that we find, just an interesting application here in demand forecasting, is that when we look at a neighborhood like this might have 126 households. 37 of these households already have solar installations. So there's 37 households with solar in this neighborhood, which is about 29% of all the stands in that neighborhood. So therefore, you would assume that there's about 89 households that could install solar in the future. But it's not as simple as that. And you can take a deeper dive into this demand forecast, because we already know from what we've established through mapping this data that not all households are in the financial position to install solar panels. And these neighborhoods are quite mixed a lot of the time. So only a portion of these properties actually fall in that Goldilocks zone of NLI 7 to 10, which are more likely to install. So you have to actually look at that number as the base. And there's 81 households that fall inside that Goldilocks zone. So your base number is no longer 126, it's actually 81. So your real forecast is 44 households that would potentially install in the future, should they have the motivation to do so. But you can take it even further, because, again, just because these households fall in that higher income bracket does not mean that they have got the disposable income to afford solar systems, which are typically not that cheap. And there are other data sets that we overlay with that anonymized credit bureau information that speaks directly to disposable income. So we have information that will tell us what the average disposable income is inside these neighborhoods. We also have a building value index that we developed as well in-house, where we calculate the value of a building based on the structure. And we know that the average property in this neighborhood is about 2 million, is worth about 2 million. All right. So these are extra metrics that we can add on top to kind of build effective demand forecasts. And just very quick sums, because I think I'm throwing away around too many numbers. But if you've got 37 households installed, and we know from our analytics that this neighborhood, we have 169 kilowatt peak of installations. We know that from our solar panel models. We therefore know that on average, these properties have systems of about 4.5 kilowatt peak. Or let's just say that's not the right way to word it, but systems that can produce a 4.5 kilowatt peak. Some will be higher, some will be smaller, but that's the average. So we now know that because there's 44 households left, there's about 198 kilowatt peak that could still be installed. So this slide talks to the financials of it for sure, but this might also be important to energy producers as well, because you might look at this neighborhood and look at it and think, okay, so how much revenue do we get in this area from supplying grid power? And in the future, should more people jump off the grid, how much would that revenue drop? And how much do we actually need to supply to this neighborhood in the future? All of these information can be drawn actually from this data. And then just the last couple of slides. So in terms of the NLI, that is the base product, extremely powerful as an income-based segmentation. But what we've recognized as well is that even people within a specific NLI class differ greatly, which you might know. So you might have two people that are both live in NLI 7, but they're drastically different in terms of their culture, in terms of the way they spend money, the type of houses they live in. You could have a guy living in a rural area and a lady that lives in a densely populated urban area. He lives on a massive farm, isolated in the middle of nowhere. He drives a Hilux, produces his own energy and so on. And the lady living in the urban area lives in a cluster township, and she drives a Polo, and her interests are totally different. So we have actually finished developing a product that looks deeper into these insights as well. And we're splitting these NLI classes even further. I'm not going to go into detail in this particular slideshow, but we take, for example, each of these NLI classes and we split them according to other natural breaks that we see in our data, such as dwelling type. So, for example, NLI 1, we might have people that live same income level, but part of them live in formal buildings and the other part live in informal, maybe shacks or that kind of thing. Same thing with all the other examples as well. And I just wanted to bring this to your attention. We are going to have a seminar on the NLI Advanced at a later stage, focusing just on that particular piece of data. So yeah, thank you very very much. I hope that wasn't too much.
Russ, no, thanks. That's fine. I think let's give the floor over to questions. I'm looking at the comments section first, and then we'll move on to verbals, perhaps. Mike Barker's got a couple of comments in there. Mike, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Thanks for the opportunity.
Welcome.
Russ, incredible presentation. This blows my mind. I think I'd like to ask you about energy poverty. The guys in the first world seem to think that the definition of energy poverty is providing enough energy so that people can survive. There's been a change recently here in South Africa. I think we should focus on the amount of energy people need so that they can thrive. And I suspect
100%.
you could dig into that sort of data. So that would be pretty interesting. And then let's talk about business and money. This sort of data, do you have it for the commercial and industrial market for C&I properties?
We do have that in the commercial industrial sector as well. So yeah, our data set speaks to the residential component and also industrial commercial as well, 100%. So a lot of our clients do request information about uptake in commercial and industrial specifically. And I agree with your first comments as well about the energy poverty. So we at this stage haven't done any sort of deep analysis on that kind of thing, but our main goal is to support that kind of analysis. So, to hear you mention something like that, it's very interesting to us because that's exactly what we want to do. We want to support that kind of analysis, into the energy market. So 100%, that is an interesting thing to look at, and I'm sure the data could speak to that to a large degree.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Is that all from your side, Mike?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
I guess we're waiting now for the next webinar on commercial and industrial, right? Thank you.
I would welcome that.
Also, you're welcome to contact us separately if you want to just discuss that data as well. I'm happy to go through the data with you as well on a one-to-one meeting or something.
Excellent.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. There was a comment from Lloyd. Lloyd, you want to pop in and just talk about your comment, or are you satisfied?
Yeah. Thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Ross, for the very informative presentation. Yeah, I was just intrigued by the percentages there of 70% for NLI 1 to 3, 20%, 4 to 6, 9.7, 7 to 10, which a conclusion that I draw is that South Africa, then it means it's a rural country. And even when we know that Eskom, together with the government, they embarked on the rigorous program of electrifying households, particularly those houses which did not have electricity before. But what I'm reading from this data and information that we have just shared with us is that, and again, this relates to exactly what Mike was talking about in terms of energy poverty, because if these things are not being addressed properly, we might see some communities, revolting against the government. And I think having such information at our fingertips, we should be able to influence the policymakers so that at least they can be heading towards the right direction. Because what we are seeing, this data, what is telling us is that we are heading actually to the wrong direction. So, and as some people might say, that we are actually sitting at a ticking time bomb. So something needs to be done. Although people have electricity, but it sounds like their lives are not being improved. Any comment from you? Thank you.
100%, I agree. Yeah, again, so our data would speak to all of that, kind of, all of those metrics in terms of, policy generation and so on. And I do suspect that a lot of our government departments will be making use of this data that we show you here for that purpose moving forward. Yeah. But absolutely.
Thanks. I see we have quite a contingent of folk from City of Cape Town online today. Guys in Cape Town, you're welcome to pop in with any questions if you want. Anything else from the floor? Otherwise, I'll go with my own question. Hands up if you've got a question. Thank you. Fahmi, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Ross. Thanks for the very insightful presentation, Ross. Maybe a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question, but how does one get access to this data? Firstly,
what you can do is you can contact us via our email if you want. It should be on the screen now, and you're welcome to just drop us a mail, and we'll be in touch with you.
Okay, all right. So maybe that's the opening question.
Yes.
Yeah, and then maybe we can talk after that. But maybe just maybe more on the technicalities of what you were presenting. I mean, I think I'm not sure if I missed it, but you were saying there that unlike the LSM almost data that was based almost on a survey of people's income, my question was, you're saying this wasn't necessarily based on a survey, but you somehow modeled data in terms of what sort of customer would be in a particular area. So if it's not based on a survey data, how did you model the data in the first place? I just that part I lost a little bit.
Yeah, that's so that deeper question about the development in that way is probably better directed at Orion, who's the statistician that deals with that. So I think I can maybe get back to you on that if you would like. But
yes,
when we talk,
just so I can understand, yeah,
I can do that. I can definitely give you some information on that, but it's definitely based on the type of consumer in terms of demographics and that kind of thing, if that makes sense. Their age, race, that kind of information as well.
What's behind it, of course, is important. And then maybe just my final question, and it's pertaining more to the solar panel and small-scale embedded generation that you mentioned, and how that you almost can associate it with your higher NLI groups of 7 to 10, I think you said. So maybe that one is maybe more analysis is required there, or maybe just more insight there. For example, since we haven't had load shedding, for example, since about April month thereabouts, the question then becomes, how much of a driver was solar installation? How much was load shedding behind people getting solar type of installations versus, I mean, if we don't have load shedding, would the drive and the motivation still be as high as what it was during load shedding? So for example, that maybe another variable sort of needs to be built in there, in that if you don't have load shedding, and what else would be the driver other than maybe affordability, which you associate with NLI 7 to 10, for example. So maybe that should be something else to consider, is that in the absence of load shedding.
Yeah, it's a super interesting.
How does that affect, for example? Yeah,
it's an interesting thing to look at. So I think there's two waves of motivation for solar panel installation. So again, it's not really something we look at. Like we more want to provide the supportive data and information, but it's a question that we talk about quite a lot. And there's two motivations which you've mentioned. The first is the load shedding, and that sort of created this massive drive for solar panels. And the market obviously boomed, and there were suddenly pop-up companies all over the country supplying solar panels. All right. And interestingly, at that point, those were not the companies that had the most interest in our data. So we thought it would be installers that would be interested to know where to install. But at that stage, the boom was so massive that they had more business than they could really work with, right? So there was no need to find new markets. So the first driver was load shedding, as you said, like the energy crisis in a way. But then the second wave is probably going to be the cost of energy. Again, once load shedding came to an end, then the market slowed down quite heavily, and that demand definitely slowed down. I think we see that in the way that a lot of companies have responded to that change or that shift. So there's less drive to buy solar panels. You'll notice the price of these solar panel systems have gone down quite significantly and so on. But the next driver might be cost of energy in the future. So it's not necessarily something that is not necessarily something that is reflected in the data itself, but I suppose the data can speak to sort of those different waves of drive when they happen, if that makes sense. You can see where those peaks might occur.
Understood. I think with the proposed Eskom tariff increases, I think almost the financial viability of these things become almost more important rather than the convenience factor of not being load shed. And and I was just concurring what you were saying is that, what maybe we can almost fine tune that 7 to 10 NLI group to say, well, those would be more likely to invest more from an investment point of view or cost of energy point of view, rather than almost a convenience factor of avoiding load shedding. And maybe that's maybe the next phase, I suppose.
Exactly. Very interesting. And I think that's what we expect is that might be the next drive is the cost of energy. And so that's going to definitely be the next drive going forward. And just an interesting thing to add to that is, so where in the past we had, I would say, less interest, not no interest, but less interest from those type of companies. Now, with load shedding sort of disappearing, we're now starting to see a very big interest from installers, because now it is becoming necessary to optimize their market and so on, if that makes sense. So I think all these things really speak to each other, but it's interesting. It's an interesting thing that you bring up.
And maybe just a final point, maybe just to concur what you were saying as well, just in a part of for the city of Cape Town, a part of the city of Cape Town, somebody was telling me that 5 years ago, give or take, 80% of almost the smaller applications were load applications, and maybe only 20%, give or take, was about small scale embedded generation. And those numbers in 2024 have completely flipped the other way around. And then, whereas in certain areas, 80% is now SSEG, only 20% almost your traditional load application. So
it's very interesting.
Even though load shedding, I don't want to say it too hastily, something that we last saw in April, maybe not in the past, but in April, there still seems to be quite an appetite for especially domestic solar installations. Thank you.
No, it's very interesting. Yeah.
Thanks.
That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, if I may. If anybody else is loading up with a question, please put your hand up in between. Ross, you mentioned at some stage growth potential index, and that to me is very interesting, because the planners are often faced with this thing about where is the load going to grow to? What's the potential for a piece of land, a parcel of land, to grow and develop into a load center that needs to be catered for? Can you just talk about what's in your growth potential index? Is potential here to sort of align with these S-shaped load growth curves that the planning guys use?
100%. So the growth potential index basically is just a simple index that sort of identifies the likelihood for an area to develop in the future, if that makes sense.
And what is it based on?
It's based on a variety of things. So it's based on the type of land cover in the area. So, for example, if you compare a wetland to a solid piece of land next to an existing urban area, there's a far higher likelihood that the adjacent urban area plot of land is going to develop over a wetland, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
but also proximity matters, and there are a couple 100%. Of other factors.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that go into that, but it's based on the likelihood of a particular plot of land being developed in the future. And then obviously there's certain pieces of land that are protected, so development might not occur there at all. Things like that. Yeah. Proximity to existing urban areas. We also will look at the new developments and see areas where new developments are occurring quite frequently, and then that also builds into that data. So there's a lot of things that go into that. Yeah.
Okay. Is there the likelihood of infection of investment? So to speak. Yeah.
No, for sure. So absolutely.
It's a multi-dimensional model that's been trained, and it's based on cases, I would guess.
Exactly.
So there is good potential then to work this into the planning side.
Absolutely, 100%.
Like likelihood of load increase.
Exactly, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Second last question. Sorry, I'm looking for hands from the audience. If anybody's got a question, pop your hand up. You're doing building-based land use.
Yes.
And the question is, in the non-domestic side, so the commercial and industrial area, how many categories do you cater for the different types of land? Henry, I know your
Oh
question.
gosh.
Yeah, roughly.
There's roughly, I think it's small industry, large industry, commercial, and then there's business parks. What else is there? Oh, there's a lot.
Okay, so
Just normal
sort of
commercial buildings.
towards the 100?
Not in the commercial space. No, there's about 92 in total across the
Okay.
board with our building-based land use. So maybe I want to say 10 to 16. I could be wrong. I could be very off. But I can provide that very easily. If anybody's interested to know what classes there are, we've got a comprehensive list of all those classes.
Thanks. So I'll contact you later about that. I see
100%.
Henry Bowes got a question. Henry, come in, please.
I can actually look for it quickly now, maybe.
So good afternoon. Thanks for that insightful presentation. I would be remiss if I didn't ask if you would be able to share what you indicate as your peak installed capacity for the rooftop PVs across the country. I saw in your slide that you indicated for an area and to show how you do it and how you calculate it.
Yes.
I would be interested to find out if you've got a figure for the
total.
Yeah.
Total. Not offhand, but it should be on the SAIEE website.
See the one on their website, the one that they've published to the public, the last release date, I checked again today, was in 2023, Q1 of 2023.
Yes. So yeah, we've got an updated one. I don't have it with me. We've got an updated one, and we're currently working on a 2024 update now. So there's one in between 2024 and that one that you're seeing on SAIEE. And we're currently working on the latest one for 2024 at this time, yeah. But then, I don't have it offhand, the national one, unfortunately. But again, if you drop me a mail, we can have a conversation about that after this.
Okay.
If you would like.
That's fine. Yeah, we're quite keen on seeing how that relates to our numbers.
Thank you. I just want to insert there, and then Mike Barker's got a last question. Just the insert from my side is that the GTI guys will also be sitting in on our upcoming webinar on the 26th of November because of the interconnection between themselves and SAIEE. So we can dig into this during that webinar or after that webinar as well. Mike Barker, your last question.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Ross, one for you.
Yes.
City of Cape Town evidently have geolocated substations and mini subs.
Yes.
Would it be possible then to identify which homes or maybe commercial buildings are linked to which substations and mini substations? Maybe a question for the City of Cape Town people as well.
Yeah. So that kind of thing is not in our data at the moment. It's not something that can't be done. It's just something that we could look into, but it's not part of the current data set, unfortunately.
Mike, are you there?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
City of Cape Town, anybody want to comment on that? Okay. Would Ross be able to get geolocation data for all your mini subs and substations so that an effort could be made to understand which of the buildings are linked to which substation? That way we could identify which transformers are likely to experience thermal overload, for example.
Yeah. So again, it's not something we have currently, but it's definitely something we could probably source. Absolutely. It's something we could look into. And it's not the first time we've had that question. We actually do get asked that quite a bit. So it might be something that we should look into, but it's possible. It's definitely possible.
Yeah, we have Nedo here who is trying to reply. Nedo, do you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, look, in terms of providing the location of mini subs, I don't think that data sits on our open portal. And in order to obtain such set data, there would sort of have to be a non-disclosure agreement needs to be signed. It can't be offered up just like that. But you can check on our open portal in terms of that data, but I doubt the position of mini subs is highlighted there.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Daniel. Russ, then from my side, I think that's it. We're out of time. I just wanted to thank yourself and Elsie for sitting in, and for the guys from City of Cape Town for a good showing. Nice to see you here, and the questions from the audience. I really appreciate your effort, and I think this is going to lead to follow-on questions. So once again, thank you from my side, from Load Research Chapter, and we will see you in a future webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. And if anybody's interested in these things, you can contact us. If you're interested in knowing all the different classes for the VBLU or any other additional information, please just drop us an email and we'll get in contact with you straight away.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you so much for having us.
Cheers then.